Join the army, see the world, meet interesting people, and take them out. That was the joke my best friend, Mike, used to tell me when he convinced me to enlist. He'd already been in for 2 years and swore it was a great life. I ended up joining his unit and even volunteered for the same special assignment team he was part of. The training was brutal, but we pushed each other through it. We were stationed in a major regional center, which meant life was relatively steady. In fact, we both fell in love and got married within a month of each other. I married a beautiful woman named Lisa, and by the time I hit 10 years of service, we had been happily married for 8. We also had 2 amazing daughters, Emma, who was 7, and Ava, who was 5. Unlike some military units, ours wasn't constantly moving around. Sure, we had to go out on missions that lasted anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of weeks, but it wasn't too frequent. Most of the time, I was home by 3 p.m. almost every day of the year. Life felt as normal as it could be. I had a wife I loved and a family I would have done anything to protect. Then, of course, Osama bin Laden decided to pull his stunt, and through some twisted logic, Mike and I found ourselves with an all-expenses-paid trip to Iraq. Leaving my family behind was tough, but Lisa and I both knew this was part of the deal when we signed up. We did our job through the build-up and the invasion, and as things settled, we started looking forward to going home. That excitement didn't last long. One day, our unit was gathered for a briefing, and the regimental political officer informed us that we weren't going anywhere. We were staying to help maintain the peace. Mike, always the wise ass, couldn't resist. "Sir, fighting for peace, isn't that kinda like screwing for virginity?" The room erupted. Seeing a bunch of tough soldiers cracking up while the officer turned red with anger was almost worth the bad news. Unfortunately, history proved just how wrong they were about peace. At least during the invasion, the enemy wore uniforms. During the invasion, we lost more men than ever before. Our unit had it rough. We'd be out on missions for up to 4 weeks at a time, operating behind enemy lines, then come back to base for a couple of weeks to recover. Although, calling them enemy lines was a stretch. Nobody could really pinpoint them on a map. No one could tell us when we'd finally get to go home. Every other night, whenever I was back at base, I used Skype to talk to Lisa, Emma, and Ava. At least that way, they wouldn't forget what I looked like before I made it back. 3 weeks into our latest mission, everything went straight to hell. Our objective was to take out a base with about 100 enemy fighters. Instead, we walked into a trap. There were closer to 1,000 of them. With just 12 of us, there was no choice but to retreat as fast as we could. We had to hold out for 2 days before the Blackhawks could get in to extract us. By then, only 4 of us were still able to walk, and we'd lost 3 of our own. The worst part? Mike, my right-hand man, my lifeline, had his knee blown out. The tendons were gone, which meant his service career was over. He, along with the other wounded, was flown back home for treatment. The rest of us, though, were kept in the country so they could rehabilitate us, get us mentally ready to rejoin society. It didn't take a genius to see that we were too undermanned to keep going. Cold, calculating military strategists have known since Roman times that when a unit loses more than 10% of its men, morale crashes. That's probably why Roman legions, if forced to retreat, had their own officers execute every 10th soldier, a brutal practice called decimation. Ruthless, but effective. Roman legions rarely ran from battle. A week after that nightmare mission, 9 months into our deployment, I was sitting in the mess tent. I had my laptop open, typing an email to one of the new widows from our unit. Since the army had confirmed their husbands' deaths, I'd been keeping in touch with all 3 of them, trying to offer what little comfort I could. Officially, their husbands were gone. The army had an entire system in place to handle these notifications, but we were a close-knit unit, and I knew they'd appreciate a more personal approach. I knew each of them well. Unlike me, they all lived on base. This third exchange was the hardest. With the first 2, I had been able to tell the truth, that their husbands had died quickly and honorably. But this time, I would have to lie. As the highest-ranking officer in my platoon, I made sure all contact with these grieving women went through me. If they had to hear lies, at least they would be consistent ones, coming from me. Just then, a small Skype notification popped up on my laptop screen. Kate Young was online. Desperate for a break from the emotionally exhausting task, I clicked to call her. Within seconds, my eldest daughter's smiling face appeared on the screen. She was sitting on the couch in our living room, her laptop on her lap, the one she'd gotten last Christmas. "Daddy," she squealed. That brought Ava running, and before I knew it, my two little girls were both talking at me at full speed, both at the same time, as usual. For the next 30 minutes, we laughed and chatted about school, their trip to the zoo that day, and whatever else popped into their heads. I could feel the tension leaving my body, the need to lash out at something, anything, slowly fading away. Then, I glanced at my watch and realized it was getting close to their bedtime. Trying to wrap things up, I asked, "Where's your mom?" Katie had wandered off-screen somewhere, leaving Ava to answer. "Oh, she's in the kitchen with Uncle Mike, Mom's new friend. He went to the zoo with us today." My blood went ice-cold. Lisa and I didn't have a brother named Mike. I fought against the sick feeling creeping up my spine. I'd seen this happen too many times before. "How long has Uncle Mike been around?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as possible. I tried to sound as casual as possible, but I wasn't an actor. I was a soldier trained to take people down, not to fake emotions. "Since just after Easter, Daddy." That was 2 months ago. The fact that Lisa hadn't mentioned any new friends told me everything I needed to know. "Does Mom see a lot of Uncle Mike? How often is he around?" I asked. "Oh, he's here most days." That's when I heard Kate whispering off-screen. "Mel, you know Mom doesn't want us talking about Uncle Mike." And just like that, my suspicion became certainty. A slow, seething rage started bubbling up, but I forced it down with everything I had. "Kate, come here," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She appeared on screen, looking uncomfortable. "Kate, does Uncle Mike stay overnight?" She hesitated. "Yes, Daddy." It took everything in me to suppress the fury that threatened to take over. "So, do you like Uncle Mike?" I asked, keeping my tone as neutral as I could. Both girls started talking at once, their voices overlapping. It was impossible to catch everything, but a few words stood out. "Slimy, he smacked me, and he doesn't like us." "All right, quiet now. Kate, you first." She took a deep breath. "No, Daddy, we don't like him, and he doesn't like us. He's mean to us when Mom's not around. I think he hurts Mom, too. Sometimes I hear her screaming from her bedroom when he has a sleepover." Damn, that hit hard. One thing the Army had drilled into me was how to plan fast in a crisis. It had saved my life more times than I could count. I scanned the screen. "That jacket by the front door, does that belong to Mike?" "Yes, Daddy." "Go get it, Kate. See if there's a wallet in one of the pockets." She ran off and came back moments later. "There is." Within 5 minutes, I had Uncle Mike's full name, address, and driver's license number. Even better, there was a security badge from his job. Kate went one step further. She slipped into the garage and got his car details, too: make, model, and license plate. Good girl. Now, I had everything I needed. "All right, girls, I need to make a quick phone call. Keep the screen on and check back when I return, okay?" The call took a little over 10 minutes. Thankfully, Mike's wife, Jessica, was home and not visiting the hospital. When I got back to the screen, I called the girls over. "Hey, my beautiful princesses, how would you like to go stay with Aunt Jessica for a few days?" That was always a hit. Jessica and Mike had 3 kids around the same age as mine, and they were all good friends. "Daddy, we haven't seen them in forever." Mel shrieked. So, Lisa had been avoiding our friends, huh? Interesting. "All right, go pack a few clothes and some toys for a few days. Aunt Jessica will be by to pick you up soon." Then I turned to Kate. "I need you to do something for me, sweetheart. Pick up your laptop and carry it into the kitchen, screen facing forward. Set it down where Mom can see it. I need to talk to her. Then go pack, okay?" "Okay, Daddy," Kate replied. As she moved through the house, I got an impromptu tour through the laptop screen. When she pushed open the kitchen door, I saw Lisa sitting at the table with a man, a bottle of wine between them. They were completely in their own world, oblivious to Kate setting the laptop at the end of the table. Then she spoke. "Mom, Dad wants to talk to you." Both of them snapped their heads around like they'd just been hit. Lisa looked terrified. The guy looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. "Hey, Lisa, how's it going? And I'm guessing this must be your friend Mike?" I said, keeping my tone neutral. Their lips moved, but nothing came out. So I kept going. "Come on, Lisa. You had to know this day would come. You must have rehearsed something for me, right?" She hadn't. That much was obvious. She tried to bluff her way through, but Lisa had never been good at lying. And right now, she looked as guilty as they come. She might as well have had a flashing neon sign on her head every time she tried to lie. "He's just a friend, Dave," she muttered weakly. "Cut the nonsense, Lisa. The girls already told me this guy's been sleeping over for the last few weeks." Finally, she decided to come clean. Her so-called heroic boyfriend tried to stand up and leave, but she grabbed his arm and pulled him back down. I waited, watching as a dozen different excuses flashed across her face like a bad movie. "I'm sorry, Dave, but I got so lonely while you were gone. I got to know Mike, and we fell in love," she said, finally going silent. I wanted to explode, to rage at them, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I forced my voice to stay calm. "Lisa, that's ridiculous. This is the first time in 9 years of marriage that I've been away for more than 2 weeks. Before we got married, I warned you what our life might look like, and you accepted it." She didn't acknowledge a single word, so I kept going. "For the record, dear, the correct order of events should have been, wait until I got home, wait until I wasn't in a place where distractions could mean death, and then, when I was back, tell me you wanted to separate. That way, I'd have had a chance to talk to you, to change your mind. And if we did separate, you could have gone and played house with this guy after that." She stared down at the table and mumbled, "Sorry, Dave. It just happened." I let out a bitter laugh. "So what now, Lisa? You're just going to dump me and ride off into the sunset with this guy?" She didn't even have the guts to look up. She just nodded. "And in this little fantasy of yours, you're planning to take my kids away from me too, huh?" Something in my tone must have hit her, because her head snapped up. It was clear she'd never even considered the possibility that things wouldn't go exactly the way she imagined. "Listen, Lisa, you know I'm into psychology. Do you remember all those conversations we had about what influences people's decisions? Nature versus nurture, genetics versus environment. Remember all those conversations we had, Lisa? Well, if the kids stay with you, they'll have a cheating mother's DNA and be raised in a cheating mother's environment. Trust me, Lisa, that's not going to happen." She flinched like I had slapped her. It was the first time I had ever spoken to her that way, and I had packed a lifetime's worth of venom into a single sentence. That's when her so-called boyfriend finally decided to speak up. "Hey, now, wait a minute. Shut the hell up," I barked. "One thing the army teaches you is how to command attention, even from across a parade ground." He shut his mouth instantly. Just then, there was some commotion off-screen. Lisa got up, saying she needed to get the door. "Wait," I ordered. "That'll be Jessica picking up the kids. They're staying with her tonight, and she'll take them to school in the morning. They should already have their things packed. Make sure they have everything they need, then come back so we can talk." Lisa left, and of course, Mike started to follow. "You sit your ass down," I snapped. He dropped back into his chair so fast he probably bruised his tailbone. I didn't say another word. I just stared at him. He fidgeted under my glare for the entire 8 minutes Lisa was gone. At one point, he even tried to make small talk about life in Iraq. I ignored him. One of the mess stewards walked over and replaced my drink. I leaned in and quietly told him to make sure I wasn't disturbed. I didn't want any witnesses for what was coming next. Finally, Lisa returned. She barely had a chance to open her mouth before I cut her off. "I've got 2 questions for you, Mike. First, did you know she was married?" He swallowed hard. "Look, man, I'm sorry. I fell for her. I'll take that as a yes." "Second question, do you even know what I do for a living?" Mike looked nervous. "Lisa said you're in the Air Force." "In Iraq." Lisa stayed quiet, watching us both closely. He interrupted, looking confused. "No, he's in the army." I thought you said he was in the air. Something? I smirked. Ah, I see where the mix-up is. I am in the army, but my regiment is called the Special Air Service. The name didn't seem to register, so I decided to spell it out for him. You probably know us by our acronym, SAS. The moment the words left my mouth, his expression shifted from confusion to sheer terror. Hell, everybody knew the SAS. Every Special Forces unit in the world studied our playbook. If the SAS came for you, you wouldn't even realize it until Lucifer himself rolled the action replay. And now, this idiot finally understood the kind of mess he'd walked into. He didn't make a sound, but the microphone picked up the silent formation of the words. Oh, hell. I leaned in, filling the screen. So, Mr. Michael Brown of 12 Pender Court, Borderdale, the answer to your question about what I do for a living is simple. I take lives. His face turned an unhealthy shade of pale. And now, for the crime of sleeping with my wife, wrecking my marriage, and putting my daughter's futures at risk, I sentence you to— What? He stammered, barely getting the word out. I roared, to total destruction. He just sat there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish flopping out of water. Lisa suddenly cut in. Oh, come on, Dave. Enough with the macho act. I know you're in the army and all, but seriously, how many people have you actually taken down? Her casual tone caught me off guard. Surprised, I turned from Mick's terrified face to hers, even more shocked to see a slightly amused, almost challenging expression. And that's when it hit me. She had no clue what I actually did for a living. Like most people, she assumed Special Forces were just a fancy name for regular soldiers. Being in Special Forces wasn't something I advertised. Outside of a small circle of friends, no one even knew I was in the SAS. I certainly never told Lisa what I did in Iraq, mostly because I didn't want her to worry. Keeping my voice calm, I replied, Well, sweetheart, I've been on base all week, so I haven't taken anyone down lately. But the week before that? Maybe 10 or 12. It was kind of a slow week, honestly. Didn't really count. Just didn't seem important at the time. Her face was frozen in shock, but I kept going. Most of them I shot. But one guy jumped me while I was swapping mags, so I had to use my knife. Stuck it in his gut, angled up through the diaphragm, right into his heart. Surely, Lisa, your mom must have told you, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Through the magic of Skype, we sat there, locked in an intense stare from opposite sides of the world. She was looking at a stranger now, someone she suddenly realized, with absolute certainty, was both incredibly dangerous and incredibly furious. I, on the other hand, was staring at someone who had just become very, very afraid. You should also know, Lisa, that I didn't hate any of those guys. They were just doing their job. I felt nothing for the one I stabbed, not even as I watched the lights go out in his eyes. Now, just imagine what I'd do to someone I actually hate. A choked sound came from Mike, and I turned my attention back to him. Are you still here? The farther away you get from my house, the longer you live. My knife has a date with your throat, and that's a promise you can take to the bank. With an audible moan, he shot up from his chair and bolted off-screen. A second later, I heard the front door slam. Now, Lisa was the one doing the goldfish impression, her mouth opening and closing wordlessly. I gave her time to collect her thoughts. Judging by her expression, none of them were good. Finally, she whispered, Are you going to destroy me, too? That actually made me pause. I still hadn't decided on her fate. Lisa, I'm sorry, but I haven't made up my mind yet. One thing I do know for sure. After bringing another man into my home and having an affair where our daughters could hear everything, you are no longer fit to be their mother. Oh, and by the way, Kate told me all about how you scream at night when he's with you. She thinks he's hurting you. I didn't think Lisa's face could look any more horrified, but she proved me wrong. One thing's for certain, I continued, my girls will grow up knowing exactly how I feel about cheaters. I paused, letting my emotions settle, shifting from pure anger to cold, rational thought. Both sides of me agreed. You know, there's a lot of research that suggests kids cope better with the death of a parent than with a nasty divorce. Lisa didn't say a word. She was smart enough to understand that statement left her with two options, neither of them good. No, Lisa, I don't think I could bring myself to destroy you. I loved you once. And up until now, I had no reason to believe you weren't a good mother. Before she could breathe a sigh of relief, I continued. So here's the deal. If I find Mike and you're still with him, I will take you down too. If you run to the police, I will make sure you regret it. If I come home and there aren't divorce papers waiting for me to sign, I will make your life a living hell. Do your research, Lisa. Check how many murderers get convicted when there's no body. I can promise you, there won't be one to find. She looked like she was about to collapse. Are you really going to take Mike down? She whispered. I stared at her. Lisa, this country has changed me. I've lost too many friends. And I've taken down too many men to hesitate now. There's barely anything human left in me, Lisa. Taking Mike out won't bother me one bit. If only you had ended things the right way, I might have been able to understand. For the first time, tears streamed down her face. I was done with this. You'd better write this down, Lisa. The divorce settlement will give me the house and full custody of the kids. Any visitation will be entirely up to me, based on what I believe is best for them. By the time I get back, you need to have found a new place to live. I'll cover your living expenses for a reasonable period until you're stable. I let that sink in before continuing. I'll send you the contact info for an army lawyer. Civilian judges tend to listen to them. When I get back, I'm taking an instructor's position at the base so I can be home with the girls every night. We'll manage just fine without you. One thing was certain, I wasn't coming back here. Before I deployed, I worried about handling combat, about being shot at. That turned out to be the least of my problems. What does haunt me is how much of my soul I lose every time I take out another man's son. It eats away at you. Good night, Lisa. Don't bring any of this up in emails or phone calls. I won't let myself get set up for a fall when I get home. Do exactly as I've said, and you'll have a long and decent life. Not the one you could have had, but that was your choice. And now, it's time to deal with the consequences. With that, I ended the call. 3 weeks later, I came home. My reunion with Kate and Ava was emotional, to say the least. I did my best to explain that their mother wouldn't be living with us anymore. They didn't understand, but thankfully, endless distractions from Jessica, Mike, and their kids helped. And every time they saw him, they asked Mike the same question. Every time the girls saw Mike, they'd ask why he walked funny, and each time, he'd come up with a story more ridiculous than the last. When I got off the plane, the police were waiting for me. Clearly, Mike was desperate. They admitted they had spoken to my ex-wife, but she hadn't backed up his claims. I didn't try any clever evasive maneuvers, but I also didn't confess to anything. In the end, they had nothing on me, so all they could do was warn me that I was being watched. The divorce went through with only a few small changes on my end. I left it up to my daughters to decide how often they wanted to see their mother. To my surprise, they barely wanted to. Their young minds seemed to place most of the blame on her for all the pain we had been through. It wasn't until much later that I found out Julia had played a role in that. She had been picking the girls up from school every day, keeping them busy reconnecting with their old friends, including her and Simon's kids. With all that fun and distraction, there wasn't much room left for their upset, no-fun mother. At one point, Lisa asked if there was any chance we could get back together. I didn't say a word. I just let the cold, ruthless part of me stare right through her. She never brought it up again. In fact, from that moment on, she made sure we were never alone together. Clearly, she was terrified of me. I got the instructor job at the base and was home every night. The girls were getting the best childhood I could provide. But no matter how well you handle it, divorce always leaves an emotional scar. That's why psychologists recommend parents stay together unless there's abuse. Still, life was good. 4 years and 2 months later, Percy Newmont was at peace. He was out bow hunting with his friends, deep in the wilderness. After all this time, he could finally go whole hours without thinking about the troubles of his past. He glanced back at his friend Peter. The two of them, along with their other buddies, worked together and spent a lot of time hanging out these days. Percy caught his friend's eye and grinned. Yes, life was good. The only thing he skipped out on was their Wednesday night poker game. That was when he was busy having an affair with Peter's wife. Moving 2 states away and creating a whole new identity had been tough. It had drained him financially, but in the end, it worked. He knew returning to Borderdale last month for his mother's funeral was a gamble. Sitting in disguise at the back of the church, avoiding his family, had felt ridiculous. But it was his mother, for God's sake, he had to go. Then, suddenly, he felt an impact from the front, and the next thing he knew, he was flat on his back. Dazed, Percy glanced down. An arrow jutted out of his chest, just below his heart. Confusion clouded his mind. His 3 friends were behind him. How the hell had he been hit from the front? His vision blurred, and he blacked out. When he came to, he realized he was alone with Peter. The others must have gone for help. Then, out of nowhere, the same searing pain ripped through him again. What the hell? Peter was gripping the feathers of the arrow, twisting and yanking it sideways. And he was smiling. The pain was unbearable. Percy slipped into unconsciousness again and, 10 minutes later, drowned in his own blood, never waking up. The coroner's officer stood over the body, shaking his head. Every year, I get dragged out here because some idiot accidentally shoots one of their friends. 2 weeks later, Lisa sat in her 12th-floor apartment, sobbing. She had been crying for the past 3 hours, ever since John, her latest boyfriend, had walked out on her. "What is wrong with me?" she whispered to herself. She thought back over the last 4 years. She had really believed Michael was the one. The truth was, she had married Dave not out of love, but because she knew time was running out. She had wanted kids, and he had been the safest bet to make it happen. So when Michael came into her life, and she saw a chance to have both the children she wanted and a soulmate, she didn't hesitate. It took about a month after he vanished for her to finally realize that maybe the love had only been one-sided. Without a second thought, he had disappeared. No goodbye, no explanation, not even taking his jacket or wallet with him. Desperate for closure, she went to his apartment and his workplace 2 days after he took off. But he was gone, completely erased. What stung the most wasn't just that he left. It was the fact that he clearly didn't care what happened to her after he did. For the first year or so, her biggest source of heartbreak had been her children. She had started the legal process to force Julia to return Kate and Ava, but that battle ended the moment David came back from Iraq and shut it down. After that, every time she called the girls, their conversations felt stiff and awkward, like they blamed her for something. At first, she still saw them about once a week. But that changed when, 9 months after she had moved out, another woman moved in with Dave. Apparently, she had been the journalist who covered the story of David and his team receiving their medals. After that, the girls hardly even wanted to talk to her on the phone. She took to parking outside the school, just to catch a glimpse of them at the end of the day. But the day she saw both of them running up and hugging that woman like she was their mother, she stopped going altogether. That year, they didn't even call her on her birthday. The pain eased a little when she met Pat. He was a few years older but shared her dream of having a family. 8 months later, she moved in with him, and they started talking about marriage and kids. 2 weeks later, he crushed her. He had met someone else and told her to leave. The next year, something eerily similar happened with Randy. They clicked instantly, and within 2 weeks, they were inseparable. 4 months later, they moved in together. And then, 3 weeks after that. Then, just like that, he dumped her, told her he was getting back with his ex-wife. After that, Lisa spiraled into a series of one-night stands, thinking it would rebuild her confidence. Instead, it did the opposite. She had truly believed John was the one. Even though she knew time was running out to have kids, she forced herself to take things slow with him. It was over a year before she finally gave in to his gentle pressure and let him move into her apartment. A small part of her regretted it, but deep down, she admitted, it was the best love she had experienced since Dave. 3 hours ago, John had met her at the door when she came home from work. His bags were already packed, sitting near the entrance. He didn't explain. He just said he was leaving. Not once did he look her in the eye as he picked up his bags and walked out. But the part that cut the deepest was the last thing he muttered as he left. Cheating woman. She hadn't even so much as looked at another man since she met him. Wiping her tears, Lisa turned her gaze to the unopened mail on the coffee table. There were 2 bills and 1 blank envelope. She had ignored it earlier in her excitement to get home to John, but now curiosity got the better of her. Picking it up, she pulled out a newspaper clipping. Confused, she scanned the article. It was about some hunter who had died in a freak accident, shot with an arrow. Her expression darkened as her eyes reached the bottom of the page. The victim had once been known as Michael Brown. He had lived right here, in Borderdale. The paper slipped from her numb fingers. Her mind flashed through memories. Michael, then Pat, then Randy, and finally, Dave. Surely not. But in her gut, she knew the answer. 4 years ago, she had almost everything. In her search for the one missing piece, she had ended up with nothing. Dazed, she stepped toward the balcony, sliding the door open. The night air hit her skin as she stared at the long, open drop to the parking lot, 12 floors below. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a turn you never saw coming? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let's start a conversation. If this story kept you hooked, be sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here, or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day. So go ahead, click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.